We are talking about the Great American Bash 1992, and this show is a big seismic shift. What this is an attempt to take WCW kicking and screaming back to the 1970s. Now, Pete, is that such a bad thing? You know, from a business and popularity standpoint, it was absolutely disastrous.
Yeah, I mean,
but I liked it then, and I like it now. So, I mean, not all bad. Now, WCW had spent the last couple of years, since they were bought by Turner, desperately trying to copy the WWF, but doing it really, really badly.
On July 14th, see the WCW crew. It's the Bash 91 on pay-per-view. Word up.
What they find themselves in early 1992 is they've alienated a lot of their hardcore fan base from the 80s, and they haven't really picked up any new ones in the 90s. It's sort of been a massive disaster. And so what they make the decision to do is they go, well, we're going to become a distinct alternative to the WWF again and try and provide for that fan base who don't like the WWF.
Yeah.
They have always said our history and our heritage is brilliant in-ring product, and so that's what they're doing here. So what WCW do with this show is they basically go, right, the showbiz is gone. PN News, he's gone. Big Josh, he's gone. Vinny Vegas, get rid of him. Terry Taylor and his computer, they are gone. Johnny B. Bad, he's going out. The Ding Dongs, they're gone. Smiles, bright tights, flashy gimmicks, they are all gone. If it is fun and it's silly, then WCW are taking it out of the back of the barn and they are shooting it through the head. The tough, ugly, frightening men are here. Tonight, on this show, all of your heroes will die, and there is nothing that you can do to save them. I would argue that is as good a reset as you could ever pull off. I mean, the man who is wielding this huge shotgun is Cowboy Bill Watts. He was a wrestler who was famed as a legitimate tough guy. He was a former football player, and he got into wrestling in the early 1960s through his teammate Wahoo McDaniel. And one day he showed Bill Watts a check that he'd got for wrestling, and the check was made out for $2,500. Bill Watts just went, I am in. Watts was never a fan of wrestling. He thought it was all fake and stupid, but what he did like was money. And that, oddly, makes the best sort of businessman within wrestling. People like your Brock Lesnar, who don't really have any respect for the business, but just want the money. They tend to have longer careers and make better decisions than the people who are like, I love wrestling so much. A couple of highlights from Watts' career. He's wrestled a bear, which is really now my signifier for, were you a wrestler in the 60s? If you took on the bear, you were a wrestler. He wrote about it in his book. He said, the handlers had pulled the front teeth of the bears, declawed them, and placed muzzles over their faces and mouths so they couldn't bite. The bears were fed Coca-Cola with honey and whiskey to get them motivated. A bear is a natural wrestler so powerful that an adult bear can break a horse's neck with one strike of its paw.
Good God.
His bear, he said he was a tough, cantankerous old bear that it was said had bitten the wrestler Louis Martinez's fingers off. The bear would get your fingers in their mouth and try to work them back to their molars, which their handlers hadn't pulled, and then bite them off. I mean, that is part of your job, having to deal with a big bear. I had a read last night of his autobiography, which is called The Cowboy on the Cross, and it is a very strange mix. He became a born-again Christian in the 90s.
As they so often do.
It's a really strange mix, this book, of quite sort of like in-depth Bible study and the most sadistic and violent stories that you've ever read in your life. So there's a big chapter about a parking lot brawl that he had where he bit off a man's ear, and he said it was just that he turned. He said, I was actually going to try and bite his jugular out. Thank goodness he turned. God was watching down on me, he said, because if I'd have bitten his jugular out, I'd be in prison for murder. He bit the man's ear off. He then sort of mentions that he takes it away as a trophy, and later that night he downs it with a beer chaser.
If you're finding a man's ear in your stool, you got to think, I mean, you best believe it is almost biblical. And then Isaiah's ear was swallowed
it really
by a
is.
Cowboy.
He writes another a story about the time that he took out someone's eye. And this is a story that Jim Ross told when Bill Watts was being inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. In a strange quirk of fate, I was was there to watch Bill go in with television's Alex Zane. An odd thing where Alex, who doesn't really follow wrestling, was present to see Bill Watts really make one of his last major appearances. He was talking about this fight. I think it was with Marines, a group of sort of army people. And so Bill Watts said there were quite a few of them in this bar. Things were getting nasty. And he said, I knew one thing. I was surrounded. And if I didn't do something dramatic and emotional, that's a frightening word in a fight.
Just piss yourself, mate. Piss yourself.
I was going to get a bad beating. I popped my left thumb in because I was going to try to pop his eye out. I missed it, but I got my right thumb in and popped his other eyeball out. It was dangling by its little cord. I tore the cord and pulled the eye out of his head, and I said, I'm from Never Neverland, where the green owls hang. I don't remember if I pulled it off the cord and ate it or not, although that is the story told by those who were there. Whichever way it happened, it got their attention. You don't remember if you pulled off someone's eye and ate it. But the worst thing is that little line at the end where he's like, I don't recall whether I ate it or not, although that is the story told by those who were there. It's a sort of like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Don't fucking wink, wink, nudge, nudge me about eating a man's eye.
Well, that man can't wink. Actually, that's all he can do.
When Jim Ross told that story, there was horror, really, in the room. And Jim Ross properly looked up like, what, you fucking babies. No, he really looked like, come on, that is funny. How fucking dare you, prudes. Really strange reaction.
If I would have stayed in California longer, would have gotten in a fight with a Navy SEAL in San Diego. Somehow or another, the SEAL inadvertently lost his eye, and somehow or another, Cowboy swallowed it. He then got into booking.
What's in his book mentions that when the police arrived, they took him out the back of the bar they were there. They just brought out their heavy-duty torches, and he thought, right, they're going to just beat the shit out of me. And instead, Bill Watts grabbed one of the policemen. He pulled his neck to one side and told the other one, I will bite his jugular out if you come one step closer to me. And the police just went, all right, let him go. And then they allowed him to walk back to his car, and off he went. I mean, the idea, is it a war zone? This sort of thing happening and just someone being allowed to leave after that happens and threatening to, again, bite jugulars out. I've never threatened to bite anyone's jugular out, let alone...
I wouldn't know where it is.
No.
I'd start crunching on the Adam's apple.
And of course, this is all there with, is Christ on the cross a literal truth? That's the page after page on that. You clearly ate a man's eye and then refused to be punished by the law for it. Just amazing. This is the man who we will soon see is going to become an executive of WCW. Do you think it was a stable, long-lasting sort of relationship they had? If you did, you are going to be wrong.
But did I get in their face and show them how to throw a punch right, or show them how to kick right, or show them how to sell right? Yeah. And the thing, let me give you a reference. How many guys you see in the corner, a guy's strangling him, he's got his hands down here on the ropes. Now you stop and think, if a son of a bitch is strangling you, where's your hands going to be? Up there trying to get his hands off. Right. So I may come up and say, okay, you saw it, and I may strangle him real quick by shutting off their air for. Now that's how you do it.
Right.
In 1970, he begins getting involved, buying into a couple of territories that aren't doing that well, with the idea that he would perform there, the audiences would go up, and he would then share as part owner. The promotions that he was involved in were in Oklahoma, and they were run by a guy called Leroy McGurk. And Leroy McGurk was a former wrestler. He'd had very bad luck. He lost vision in one eye. This is all about eyes, this show. He lost vision in one eye in a childhood accident, and then later in life, he was completely blinded after a car accident. Bill Watts talks about this as well. He says, they always blamed a car wreck. I was told by more than one source I considered reliable that he'd lost his eye in a bar fight, said to have been instigated by Bob Clay, another wrestler. When a guy had sucker punched Leroy, shards from his glasses went into his eye. After that, he said he had a hard-on about life, which made him difficult to deal with. He became a heavy drinker and was very bitter. Bill Watts' entire life is going out for a drink and eyes coming out. just hideous. So the territory that Leroy McGurk and Bill Watts ran, it covered Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, and a few towns dotted around in Mississippi, Missouri, and Texas. And so Watts begins booking wrestlers to come in. He begins working and running the TV recordings. And what he's learning, of course, is the backstage part of wrestling. He's still an active performer. He was at one point also offered a run with the NWA title. They wanted to sound him out, the board of directors, to see whether or not he was interested. He made it clear that he didn't want to do it. In those days, the NWA champion travelled all across America, would go up against the top baby faces in all the different regional promotions. And because the top baby faces were there bringing the money in, week out, they didn't want them to lose. So often the NWA champion would have to go to a 1 hour or a 90-minute draw with the baby face sort of almost getting it, but the time running out. And Watts really said, I'm not an hour-long wrestler guy. I like good matches that are hot and have really definitive finishes. And he said, I just wouldn't be able to do 60-minute, 90 minutes, certainly not more than once a year. So he moved on from there. He goes to other places. He works in Georgia, he works in Florida, and everywhere he goes, he gets a sort of reputation for getting people over quickly with quite sort of solid, decent angles. Everywhere he goes, he also makes the promotion money.
Check my bag, make sure everything's packed. I got a good woman, but sometimes they forget how to pack your bag. Let's see. Yeah, I'll need this football helmet. There's my belt with a good heavy buckle on it. A tire iron won't go through security. A metal ball bat. Micah, bring me a wooden bat. That metal one won't pass airport security. Plenty of tape here. Tape my hands. Oh, Midnight Rider mask. How'd that get in here? Thank you, Micah. I don't need clothes. I'm not going to a fancy tea party. I knew it happened sooner or later. I'm coming to New Orleans. And Jack, make one thing for sure. I'm coming there to take care of business.
And by the end of the 70s, this Oklahoma promotion is selling out the Louisiana Superdome. And he does that through really making a huge star out of one guy who comes along, who is Junkyard Dog. And Watts said Junkyard Dog was always very limited in what he could do in the ring. So initially, it was important we booked him with people who could work with him, emphasize his strong suits, and build up his self-confidence. We didn't need anyone tearing him down or trying to show up his weaknesses. I could tell he would become a star. He just had that inner glow.
I love that. I love that Junkyard Dog was ever sort of sad or kind of didn't back himself.
And what Watts is excellent at is he doesn't just say it's what you can do in the ring, it's being a tough guy, it's being a hard man. That was an important part of it. But he also talks about how many of those tough guy hard men never got over because they lacked the magic ingredient, whatever it is, they have. He talks about Dusty Rhodes. He says he's a better athlete than you'd imagine, but he was full of ego and everything. But he says he had it. And when Dusty Rhodes would get on the mic, Bill was talking about having goosebumps, even though they didn't get on professionally. He had goosebumps listening to Rhodes doing the promos. So he was always aware of that magic ingredient in wrestling that made it really, really special. Everything you've heard about him so far is he's a very good businessman and he really understands this. There are a couple of things about him which are less palatable. One of them is that even though he pushed Black Stars, he did seem to he had a problem with race. He was sort of very outspoken. Racial language that he used is pretty terrible. And he would that would cost him his job at WCW.
It is what it is. You know what I mean? But I'm going to tell you, like Bill Watts told me, he says, look, I'm a racist and I might call you a maybe once, maybe twice. But I'm going to tell you right now, I know how to make money.
Once Junkyard Dog really is on top, Watts continues this process of going, I'm a good businessman, and he decides to split from Leroy McGurk, and he sets up his own promotion in the same area, which is called Mid-South. His first major show, he's run an angle where the Freebirds have blinded Junkyard Dog with hair removal powder. And he's very, very, very keen on making wrestling seem real. Obviously, we'll see that in the ring. But here, where Junkyard Dog is blinded, he said to Junkyard Dog, you have to sit at home wearing bandages around your eyes. Everyone must believe that you are blinded. It was the point where I believe Junkyard Dog missed the birth of his daughter because Watts had got him in that angle and said, you can't go to the hospital. I mean, that's how serious he was back then.
That's crazy.
His first major show has Junkyard Dog getting revenge on Michael P.S. Hayes and the Freebirds. And that is a huge, huge sellout of the Superdome. In 1992, one of Ted Turner's attorneys remembers working with Bill Watts back in Georgia. And so he says to Ted Turner, I think there's one guy who'd be really good to take over this struggling WCW. It's a guy called Bill Watts. His first job is they approach him and they say, we want to get rid of Dusty Rhodes. He's horrible and he's full of ego and the figures aren't very good. So Watts goes in to see Dusty, who he's worked with over the years, knows very well. And he says to Dusty, here's the deal. I'm taking over and part of the deal is I'm supposed to fire you. What I want to know is, can we work together? I know your abilities and your weaknesses and I want to work with you, but you have to understand I'm the boss. And Dusty Rhodes got up from behind his desk. He gave Bill Watts a hug and said, let's do it.
No, I thought he was going to say, no, thank you, Daddy.
Yeah, and lose an eye.
No way.
Yeah, but Bill Watts said, look, but Dusty did terrific work from then on. He said he's one of the most creative guys I've ever known, but he has a lot of demons in terms of taking responsibility and setting his ego aside. I knew Dusty could be a real asset, but he needed strong leadership. So Watts is suddenly in a good position of power, and he comes in with a load of old school values. First one, no foam mats at ringside. It's just going to be the floor from now on. No brawling outside the ring. If you do that, you get disqualified. You can't use the barricades or the corner posts as weapons. And the biggest one of all, any and all moves off the top rope are banned. Right? Now,
good Lord.
He got a lot of criticism from these over the years. The best matches of 1992 to this point had been between Brian Pillman and Jushin Liger, which were high-flying affairs where they were jumping, all over the ring. And Watts has talked in his book, for example, about why he did this. And he said, I got rid of the mats, he said, because they don't really help when you fall on them. He said, there's not much difference. And he said, I thought, actually, there's more chance of people hurting themselves if they twisted their ankle on those mats where they're a bit slippery. I mean, and that is bullshit. That's never happened once.
That is.
And he said, people said, the wrestlers could get hurt on the concrete. And he said, my response was, yes, but our guys are tough guys. And he said it was a great talking point. People sort of said, well, it's just made it far more dangerous, for nothing really. And Watts' response to that was, well, golly, we put a little danger back into wrestling. How about that? He also then brings in a load of rules, which all the wrestlers hate. He said, you have to turn up in the dressing room an hour before the show starts. All wrestlers had to stay until the very final match was over. So if you were on the opening match, you then had to sit through about 3 hours, before you could go home. Wrestlers were not allowed to bring their wives or children into the locker room. If wrestlers were on the other side of the face and heel divide, they weren't allowed to stay in the same hotel. They couldn't talk to each other outside the arena. And if they were training in a gym and one of the opposing heels or baby faces came in, they had to leave. So he's making it very sort of like back in the 70s when everyone believed wrestling was real. One of the other things he did was he was told he had to make big cuts and save costs. And so there are rumours that Bill Watts' salary was tied to the amount that he saved, so that he basically was paid whatever he could cut off everybody else's contracts. So he did that ruthlessly. He got rid of catering, and he would continually badger people to get pay cut. Or he would say, I'm going to wait till your contract expires and then we'll hire you on a nightly basis. So the idea was everyone was supposed to be working much, much harder and being paid less. He said to Brian Pillman, I want you to take a pay cut. And Pillman had said, absolutely no way. And so Bill Watts said, well, I'm going to job you out every night. And Brian Pillman said, well, then I will be the highest paid jobber in history.
Comes in and, I mean, he's a drugger and a drunk.
Right. I was going to ask you what your opinion was on Jake. He just had a comment.
He's a piece of shit.
Okay. He had a quote in there. He said that if he had the chance, he would pee on Bill Watts' grave, but there's a long line.
Well, that's true, and he doesn't have the guts to do it. He would be too afraid that Bill Watts would come back and snatch his balls if he could find them.
Right.
Because Jake was never known for courage. So he's the typical guy that could say that from a distance or in a drunken dope stupor.
Right.
So, I mean, what Jake says or doesn't say is of no consequence to me. He's aptly named and he's a piece of shit.
I had a quick read of Bill Watts' autobiography when I was doing some of the notes for this. It talks about the reasons why he ends up leaving WCW. He was an abrasive guy. He wasn't really made to be an executive. He was intimidating. He was sort of famous for pissing out of his office window, which he works not for a wrestling company, but for Turner Entertainment. He works for a TV company, and the idea that was acceptable, he was just like, well, it's just fucking jokes, isn't it? Everyone was like, you are absolutely not welcome here. His final straw, really, he'd given an interview before he'd taken over WCW where he was talking about racism. And there was a guy who later became a governor of Georgia who ran a restaurant. And he said, I don't want to serve black people. And obviously people said, you have to. Yeah. You fucking mutant. And so he said, well, in that case, I will close down my restaurant so I don't have to do it at all.
This guy sounds like a real businessman.
So Bill Watts was talking about this guy in the interview, and he said, I respect him for his moral stance. He said, I don't agree with him. I think it's, a bad stance to have, but you have to respect the fact, and he was entitled to do so, to shut his business down rather than serve black people, which he didn't want to do. That is one of those arguments, again, that you sort of go, you find yourself oddly in, like, why are you talking about this in a wrestling newsletter?
Unless you want to make a point about it.
Yeah. How have you ended up getting in this mess?
You're confusing the right to say stuff with an imprisonable offence.
Yeah. Bill Watts says here, did I agree with his politics? No. I never said his politics or his morals were ethical because I was, and still am, against racism. The only respect I had for Lester Maddox was that he believed so strongly in his right to discriminate that rather than bow to the legislature, he closed his business. His convictions were wrong, but at least he had convictions and believed in them.
Cool.
You can apply that to any Nazi. You go, awful, but they believed it.
They believed
it. And that is an admirable quality. What happens is this gets back to one of the Turner executives who is in charge of the Atlanta Braves, the former baseball legend, Hank Aaron. A journalist told him to have a look at this story. The result of it was Hank Aaron had said, I think this is totally unacceptable.
Right.
And Bill Watts says he'd already resigned because he didn't like backstabbing that was going on. But it seems more likely there was, this was the final straw.
Right.
And so Watts went out. He was immediately given a job in the WWF. And in 1995, he went there. But he felt that Vince McMahon was too controlling, wouldn't let him do the things he wanted to do, which presumably was to do exactly what he'd done just here. Have Doink going 45 minutes in a grueling thing with Duke the Dumpster Drozy. Terrible. What I did like about his book is he talks about Steve Austin. And by this point, Bill Watts is a born-again Christian. So he says, a few months after I left, Steve Austin became very popular after debuting a new catchphrase, Austin 3:16, which he said meant, I just whipped your ass. Well, John 3:16 is God's demonstration of love, the greatest demonstration of love the world has ever known. It's probably the most important Bible verse of all because of that demonstration of love. And to use that to put down an opponent and make it a prop in wrestling is not only despicable and immoral, but also blasphemous. I hope Steve comes to a point in his life where he realises what he's doing before it's too late. For him to influence a generation of kids who shoot the finger at authority and have no respect for anything, it just makes me ask, what is Steve Austin's contribution to our world? In the same book, he does talk quite a lot about eating people's ears and eyes.
Yeah. It's important to remember where that is coming from.
It's slightly like when Charles Manson is like, the modern world, it's chaos and they think I'm bad. Yeah, you are. You are.
Yeah,
you're awful.
You are the worst.
He also proposed to his current wife via an ad in their local newspaper.
I only have eyes for you. He's got lots of eyes.
Suzanne, everyone knows I lost my heart in Ada. I love you so. You're the most beautiful woman I've ever met, the keeper of my heart.
One fridge for sale.
As Michael Bolton's song says, I want to be your sole provider. Will you marry me, Bill? We still have a copy of the ad framed and hanging on a wall in our home.
Oh, so it went well then. Yeah, that's the main thing.
It did, yeah. I was really taken with Suzanne. She asked really discerning questions. The big one was about the slip.
Like? What did the eyes taste like?
With my previous wife. Why did your marriage of 26 years come to an end, Bill? I said, it was my fault because I was a whore. That blew her away. She'd never heard a man refer to himself as a whore.
Oh, new man. Feminist.
Yeah. She said as much to me, and I asked her, do you think being a whore is gender specific? A whore is a whore, and I was a whore. Bill Watts bothered about the gender specificity of whore in a really right-on way. Eats eyes, pisses out of office windows. Just absolutely mad. My favourite bit in his book is just the thing about... He had a son called Eric, and Eric was pushed very, very hard when Bill Watts was in charge, to worse than Dustin Rhodes. And Eric Watts could not do wrestling. He couldn't get it.
Eric with a knee, got him in the solar plexus, far side. Didn't get all of that drop kick.
And he was pushed way beyond the level he should have been. So when Bill Watts is fired, Eric Watts is fired pretty soon afterwards. Never really has a career again. But he did re-emerge in TNA in about 2002. A little comment on there with Bill Watts, who was talking about after he'd left WWF, he never went back into wrestling. And he said, between my marriage, my business and my faith, I wouldn't have much time to watch wrestling these days, even if I wanted to. My son Eric, who's working for TNA, is always trying to get me to watch his show. But I tell him I don't really want to watch the stuff. He wanted to send me a tape, and I finally said, OK, I'll watch it, just for you. But I didn't. So
too busy to watch my own son's stuff.
I've got to put a newspaper announcement of a wedding, Eric. I can't sit there. I know 2 years ago all I was talking about was how great you were going to be, but now I'm gone. I have no interest in watching even for 5 minutes.
I've got to listen to my Michael Bolton records. That's what I have to do.
Eric, I cannot be your sole provider. The important thing is, Pete, having got to the end of this episode, the important thing is next week we will be talking about those matches that nobody wants to see.
Wants to see. No, the indoor fireworks will have been exploded. The matches will begin. We'll actually see Bill Watts looking very much not like the terrifying individual Mark set him up to be, looking like just an old bloke.
That's exactly how he reels you in.
That's how he gets you.
Excuse me, partner, may I ask, did you just knock my beverage? your pink lemonade, sir? Yes, allow me to buy you another one. No need, son. I will simply take this in recompense.
Everything I've ever done is built on this testosterone world of me as an aggressive human being, and it's so hard for me not to be, as you can tell. I mean, right. You know, if Jake the Snake was here, I'd look right in his eye and spit in his face because I think he's a scum, you know, or anybody else. I don't care who they were. Let me tell you, they've only got two choices: to sit there or to wipe it off or to fight me. And I'm not afraid of anybody physically.